Welcome back to my YouTube channel. I'm Nancy Rynes, and today we're going to be doing the block-in for a Mexican gray wolf study. This is a study for a larger painting that I'm thinking about working on, but even though this painting is kind of big, we'll call it a study for now. Let's take a look quickly though at the palette that I'm going to use. Titanium white, yellow ochre, permanent red medium, burnt sienna, raw umber, cobalt blue, and Payne's gray. These are all Gamblin colors. Now I use Gamblin colors, number one, because I love the paint. Number two, because they're made in the US, which means that the shipping to me isn't that far. So if you're in Europe or even in Australia, you might want to look for a type of paint that is produced in your country. That way the shipping won't be as crazy. I'm always looking for ways to cut down on greenhouse gas emissions. So keeping things closer to home is helpful in that way. I'm using odorless mineral spirits. Miscellaneous flat and filbert brushes. These are just leftovers that I had because this is a loose painting. These are all old brushes that I'm using. And then prepared gator board. Now gator board is a really rigid polystyrene kind of product. It's dimensionally stable, acid-free. It's just not as durable as, let's say, birch plywood. So you can see that I've already come in. I've prepared the surface of that board with some gesso and then let that dry. I drew the image on and then put in a little bit of burnt sienna there in the background just to make the background something other than white. And now I'm coming in, you'll see me come in with a bunch of different grays. Now these grays are mixtures of white, Payne's gray, raw umber, and sometimes a little bit of burnt sienna and or blue, depending on whether I need that gray to go a little bit warmer or cooler. Now this wolf, the Mexican gray wolf, looks a little bit different from the northern timber wolf that most people are used to seeing in that it tends to be a lot more brown. It has more browns and grays in it. It's a tiny little bit smaller than the more northern wolves, and so it looks, honestly, it looks a little bit more like a German Shepherd than what you might think of as a wolf. Although its snout is long like a wolf, its ears are long like a wolf. It is a wolf. It just has a look that's a little bit different. So you'll see when you watch me do this, this wolf's going to look a little bit more different than like some of the wolves you might see at a zoo. But again, it's a Mexican gray, which means it's going to have more of those umbers and grays in it than some of the more northern wolves, and especially even the wolves in Europe. And an Arctic wolf will tend to be a lot more white. So this is going to look, again, it's going to be more in those brown shades, more kind of earth tone shades. And there's a reason for that. It lives down here in the desert and into Arizona, New Mexico, Texas, and into the actual country of Mexico. And we don't get a lot of snow here. So these wolves have evolved to kind of blend in with the landscape, which tends to be some of those more brown greens, more browns, and a lot of open rock areas. So these wolves, because they're more grayed down, they're more brown, they will blend into the environment a lot better than, let's say, if you were to transplant an Arctic wolf here. So I'm just working in with some of this is a more reddish gray, so I've got a little bit more of that burnt sienna in here. And just making color notes all the way through the wolf. This piece, I believe, is about a 12 by 24 at the moment. I'm not sure if I'm going to ever frame it. It may just be a study, but it's actually fairly small for me. I tend to paint rather large, but it's great for a study if I want to work out problems. I like to do that in the smaller pieces. So here we're coming in with some cooler grays. Again, the legs on these guys are a lot more grayed down and even a little bit more tan than some of the more northern wolves. So you'll see I'm coming in with some darker grays here. In the next session, I'm going to lighten some of these areas up, but for now I want to go dark. In oil painting, you tend to work dark to light. That's not always the case. You don't have to do it that way. But for me, that's the way I tend to work, is I like to get some of the darker and midtones in first and then come in with the lightest lights toward the end. So I'm working my way from darker to lighter. Now that's completely the opposite of watercolor. Watercolor, you work from light to dark. But here we're going to be working, I've already got the darks in. Now we're working midtones. You can see me putting in some of those midtone grays. I will refine these the next time I paint, but for right now, this is just a block in. This is just to get the energy and the movement and some of the basic colors in the areas where they're going to be. You can see the side of this wolf. I'm coming in with some midtone grays that are both cool and warm depending on where they are. So that's basically just white, Payne's gray, raw umber, maybe some burnt sienna to warm it up, or some cobalt blue to cool it down. You don't really need tons and tons of different colors of paint once you learn how to mix them up. So again, the snout is going to be a little bit lighter gray, and I'm just getting all these grays in right now, making sure that I have the anatomy of this wolf correct. That's a huge point for me. If I don't have the anatomy correct at this point, I make it correct. It needs to be right for me. I'm not one of those people who can just let bad anatomy go in an animal, because I tend to work a little bit more representationally. I'm not a super contemporary painter, so I want to make sure that all of my anatomy is correct in my animals. So here I'm coming in with some warmer. This is burnt sienna, a burnt sienna mixture, and just kind of noting where those warmer areas are on the animal's hair. At this point, I'm not super careful with detail. I don't need to be, because again, this is just a block in. And as you can see, I'm going through and smoothing out those edges kind of at the same time I'm laying in the paint. So I want to always make sure, especially during the block in, that the edges between the different tones of paint here are soft. I don't want harsh edges at this point. I can put in harder edges later, but for right now, especially during the block in, I don't want those hard edges to stay. I'm going to soften those out as you see me work through this. Now again, this is a little bit darker than it will be in the final piece. So again, these colors are a little bit on the dark side. I will lighten a lot of these up, but for right now, these are going to be the dark tones and the mid tones. But this is where you're getting the structure of the painting down. And in this case, since it's just a study, it's really the structure of the animal that I want to dial in. I want to make sure that's all correct before I call it quits for the day. Now, again, this will be refined quite a bit in, the next session that I do. And so we're going to just watch me kind of finish this off and come back in with, again, just finishing up these midtones. I'm putting in some cooler midtone grays here in the neck area, changing it up, keeping it warmer in some areas and cooler in others. This is actually white mixed with my yellow and a little bit of Payne's gray, just to keep it still in the grays. Again, just keeping that variety going. And I'm going to work on the paw last. You can see I work like across the painting. I don't work on one area and finish it. I want to make sure that the whole painting, especially during the block in, looks good and cohesive together. All right, so this is where I leave it. I'm going to leave it here. I'm going to let this dry and come back later. So for full demos and classes, you can check out my Patreon page and become a member for just a little bit per month, and you'll get full access to all of my videos there. You can book a workshop for your group by emailing me, Nancy at nancyrynesstudio.com. I'm always happy to do workshops. And then for more information, you can check out my website, nancyrynesstudio.com. Thanks so much for tuning in today, and see you next time.